Over the last few years, Seiko has been steadily adding more watches to the higher end of their collection north of $1,000. Some of the watches that represent this range have been head scratchers at times, not really delivering much more compared to their entry-level offerings. However, today we'll be looking at their Sharp Edge GMT watches with well-finished dials, cases, and one of the most attainable true GMT movements on the market. Let's jump in. Now, before we look at these watches, I do want to mention, because we're talking about true GMTs, another alternative to these watches here with the Mito Ocean Star GMT. This watch comes in just north of $1,000 and is one of the few exceptions in the industry of finding a true GMT caliber in the range under $2,000 and even $3,000. TeddyBaldassarre.com is a full authorized dealer of Mito watches, so we recommend checking that out. If a watch like this is interesting to you with these Sharp Edge GMTs, that's also another one to look at. So to begin here, these watches are housed within the Presage collection, the family to more refined, elegant options that often showcase the brand's finishing acumen, especially when it comes to dials. Now, the Sharp Edge collection that debuted in 2020 distinguishes itself with more faceted, angular case constructions, a novel geometric dial finish, as well as the inclusion of their calibers from the 6R series. Although there are some examples of models like the large Landmasters that utilize a GMT in the past, it is actually a complication that generally is more neglected by the brand. So when Seiko decided to expand the Sharp Edge collection to include a set of GMTs, it was a move that should have probably been a bigger deal than it was at the time, especially given this currently is one of the most attainable entry-level true GMTs out there on the market. And for this video, we have three different ones to look at: the blue dial SPB 217, the black dial SPB 221, and the brown dial SPB 225. Digging into the case and wearing experience of these watches, we have a somewhat larger overall case construction measuring at 42.2 millimeters in diameter, viewed together with the not insignificant thickness of 14 millimeters, and this watch could reasonably be called larger. Though the more restrained lug-to-lug length for this diameter means this GMT should still wear well on a majority of medium to larger wrists out there. One factor to consider is the solid end link of the bracelet that will add to the wear here. However, if swapped with another strap, you will find that this one is going to wear closer to that of a 41.5 millimeter case. Looking beyond the sizing and following the Sharp Edge description, the case showcases a mix of brushing and polishing spanning the wide array of facets employed in this model's angular architecture. Resting atop the case, a multi-layered bezel slopes sharply towards the flat sapphire crystal with an outer stepped and polished ring and an inner glossy anodized insert, complete with the 24-hour markings. At 3, a sizable 6.5 millimeter push-pull crown signed with the Seiko S works in tandem with the prominently domed screw-down case back and securing this watch's sporty 100 meters of water resistance. Set between 20 millimeter lugs, a 3-link stainless steel bracelet leans into brushing for the majority of its top surfaces and polishing on the outermost portions of the center links as well as the bracelet sides. Tapering to 18 millimeters, this bracelet terminates at a push-button clasp with a stamped face with 2 points of micro adjustment and machined interior elements. The bracelet is better than the norm for Seiko standards, which candidly is not that great. However, for the price range of around $1,400, I think this is perhaps lagging behind the competition in this range, because we are taking a step up here, yet it is completely usable at the same time. As a note, both this case and bracelet are treated with Seiko's super hard coating, which should help to avoid some scratches. But in my experience, this is nowhere near that of other surface hardening treatments, say like from Damasco or Zinn as an example. So just keep all this into context and make sure your expectations are set properly. This considered, the case is no question a step up from many of the entry-level Presage models, but there is no question that the dial is where most of the praise from the finishing department is warranted. Like previous members of the Sharp Edge collection, including the excellent time-only SPB 167 we looked at last year, these GMTs lean into an eye-catching dial treatment that, although is achieved through a pressing process, is one of the more entrancing Seiko dials that you can find regardless of price. This geometric design stems from a Japanese stylized pattern meant to evoke hemp leaves. In this case, whichever dial color we're looking at, the effect is truly impressive at the price point, playing beautifully with the changing lighting conditions while adding an element of three-dimensionality. Beyond the primary dial surface, there are a number of elements that are also worthy of taking a closer look at. Starting with the faceted applied hour markers, large Dauphine hands manage time-telling duties with a central facet, with half being polished and the other half brushed. As you'd expect, a prominent helping of Seiko's Luminbright luminescent material is present in the hands and to a smaller extent on the indices, though it's still enough for easy nighttime legibility overall. At 6, we see a multi-layered pointer date sub-register that is the only part of the dial that lags behind, as the smaller display and cramped numerals of the 30 and 1 is jarring to my eye. At 9, a power reserve indicator is also present and maintains symmetry as a result of the subsidiary date and the corresponding text at 3. Of all the dial colors among this trio, the blue appears to have the best ability to showcase that textured surface and allowing this dial to pop, with the brown closely behind. But as mentioned at the beginning, perhaps the biggest news with this watch, apart from the appearance, has to be with how it stacks up with the industry thanks to that GMT caliber within. Thus far, the majority of time-only Presage and Prospex collections that were positioned between $1,000 to $1,500 or so have relied upon the upgraded 6R35 caliber that offers an extended power reserve of 70 hours, in part achieved with its lower beat rate of 21,600 vibrations per hour or 3 Hertz. However, in this case, we have a more complicated 6R64 with that GMT complication. The other notable element of this movement, apart from the upped oscillating frequency, is the ability to independently adjust the local hour hand without stopping the balance, the defining characteristic that some might say is overrated, but this is one of a few GMTs with this ability under $4,000. As mentioned, this movement also separates itself from the vast majority of Seiko's offerings with a faster 28,800 vibration per hour or 4 Hertz beat rate. And while it is a small difference, the second hand sweep is a nice touch smoother than the 21,600 vibration per hour variants. The faster rate does come at the cost of the power reserve in this instance, with the 6R64 offering 45 hours, which is of course solid, but not as compelling as the 70 hours offered by the standard 6R35. Decoration of the movement is nearly non-existent, with the only noteworthy point being the Geneva style waves across the rotor and some beveling on the outer perimeter of select bridges. In terms of general specifications for this movement, just to unpack here, you're looking at 28,800 vibrations per hour, 4 Hertz. It does feature hacking and hand winding, hacking stop in the second hand when you pull the crown to the farthest position, and a power reserve of 45 hours. Speaking anecdotally, at the time of recording this video, I only tested one of these variants, but we can correct this in post and show all of the accuracy of these models. But with the blue dial variant that we tested at 5 different positions, it was running between time of -8 to +3 seconds per day at those 5 positions. But now with looking at these watches, let's just kind of discuss them at a high level and just in general Seiko in this price range of $1,000 to $1,500. As mentioned at the beginning of this video, some of the watches released by Seiko in this price range, in that $1,000 to $1,500 range and above, can be head scratchers at times. You're like, all right, who is this really for? They're almost just cannibalizing themselves with producing watches at a lesser degree and are kind of delivering maybe 95% of what you're getting at that higher range. Here, this is, I think, a better execution of giving some separation from the lower tier. For one, GMTs and Seiko, now thinking about it, don't really go hand in hand. This is not something they dabble with all the time, and to see a true GMT movement in a watch like this, it's compelling. There's not so many on the market, although some might just say, okay, I really don't care about the extra step for something off the shelf from like a Soprod, Sellita, or Etta. Still, this is nice to see and have the optionality to do it. From a finishing perspective across the board, I think from the case, pretty well done. The dial though, spectacular, absolutely looks amazing. I love the mixing of polishing and faceted surfaces to the hands as well as those indices on the dial. The dial to me is really the star of the show. I will say the bracelet, although good for Seiko standards, might have some issues when stacked up to some of the competition. We're talking about closer to $1,500, and this is a whole new world of watches that are available at this price range, and the things that maybe work in the $500 to $1,000 price range are not gonna be the same things that are gonna work as you start to jump up to this next tier. And I think that's one of the challenges with Seiko at the moment when looking at their entire collection. A lot of the practices and things that worked maybe at that entry door, they're still administering and allowing to actually take place in some of their watches as they've gone up market, or at least made more watches available between the $1,000 to $2,000 range. This all considered, I think these are really solid GMTs for those with medium to larger size wrists. And I would say are one of the better releases from the kind of new and improved Seiko Presage line. And I like the Sharp Edge collection. I really think that these, from the dial perspective, are unique and different. Even though it's achieved through a pressing technique, it's a very entrancing looking dial. And that allows it, I think, to separate from the crowd. But again, I think the big challenge for these watches, despite there being some compelling value when it comes to the GMTs, is going to just be the competition. You're in a different range, and that requires a different level of scrutiny that your watch brand is going to be under. You look at that Mito Ocean Star that I mentioned a little bit before, bracelet smokes it, you have a longer power reserve, it is going to be a larger watch, which is another point and thing we have to mention with this piece. Then you look at just other brands that are out there in this $1,000 to $2,000 range. You're starting to get into Oris territory. A lot of great micros are even producing great bracelets. We're talking about like a Formex as an example. Zinn is in this price range and producing some great things with their case hardening. There's a lot more on the table when you start to get up here, but still, all of this considered and kind of getting more out of this conceptual idea of what Seiko is in this price range, I think this is at least one of the watches that they've produced that I think is able to stand on its own, and for the money is there more than others when it comes to value, given the upside of the movement, and I think at the end of the day, a really well finished dial and approach in terms of its looks. But all right guys, I'd love to see your comments down below on your thoughts of these watches. What do you think of these Sharp Edge GMTs? I think generally for me, I think they work, and of a lot of the models that Seiko has released above $1,000, these are more appealing to me than many of the releases, but it seems like Seiko is starting to really think about this more, I would hope, and how the brand can continue to ascend. If they are going to raise prices, how can they, in the same way, have corresponding improvements to their watches and not just rest on the laurels of what has worked in the $500 to $1,000 range. But guys, if you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon to stay up to date with new content. That really does help as well as the channel continues to grow. Also, be sure to check out TeddyBaldassarre.com, the Mito Ocean Star that I mentioned, but also just the wide variety of brands that we have for sale. A full authorized dealer of all the brands that we offer for new products, quick and fast fulfillment, dedicated customer support, and again, that full factory warranty for all of our new products. And definitely check out the new pre-owned section with new models coming in every single week. If you want to stay up to date with the content in addition to the YouTube channel, be sure to follow on Instagram and see some great photos of watches in the process. But guys, thank you again so much for watching. Be well, and I will see you all very soon.